This is called an Anjali Mudra, which is a Buddhist greeting, and I'm using it to welcome you to this lesson on Buddhism. Please notice that Buddhism started about 2,600 years ago-ish, and I encourage you to watch this video because these people online do so much of a better job than I do. I've got a webcam and then my slides. Like this isn't big, except I think I'm entertaining and informative. Anyway, I love talking about Buddhism. I'm not Buddhist. I'm not going to be Buddhist. I'm not going to convert. I'm Catholic, and that's the faith that I was born into and chose to remain in. But Buddhism has some really cool stuff that can still be informational and helpful for people who are trying to find a way to live their lives. And it, interestingly, is not, it can also be called not a religion. It is one of the major world faiths, but it's also kind of not a religion because Buddhism isn't so much concerned with where did we come from, where are we going when we die, as much as what are you doing while you're here. Whatever happens when you die will happen. So what are you doing here that you can actually control? So that's one of the cool things that I like about Buddhism is it offers a reminder of the impermanence of all things, detachment from things. So if Hinduism had one word, for me it was color, but if Buddhism has one word, and it actually is used, it is detachment. Detach yourself from all the things you want, all the things you think, all the things you're trying to do, and really try to get down to the core of existence. So starting from the top, the symbol is this wheel with the spokes, not Old Crow Medicine Show wagon wheel type thing, but the Eightfold Path. All the different spokes represent the 8 teachings of the Buddha to achieve enlightenment, and they also represent, it's a wheel: birth, life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth. So the wheel. So it starts in Northeast India, in Hindu India, because you notice it's, 560, and then Asoka here, 263, we'll all talk about. So it's, Hinduism's been around for like 2,000 years almost by this point, by the time Buddhism comes along. It starts in India, in Hindu India, which is why we see there's so many similarities between Hinduism and Buddhism, except that how do we achieve enlightenment? To me, in my mind, that's where they diverge. So Asoka is a pretty cool story. Asoka is one of the greatest rulers in Indian history, in their history books and all stuff. Asoka was a warrior. He was a conqueror. He conquered almost the entire Indian subcontinent. Dude knew battle, warfare, bloodshed, death. He knew it. It's how he got his empire. Except until he gets down to like about here in the Indian subcontinent, partly because the Tamils who live down around there are like, they're fierce warriors who nobody can really conquer. But also, Asoka, there's this one battle that he has, and he looks out at the battlefield when he's done, and there's so much death and destruction. It's just blood, everybody, like, just awful. And this guy who's a warrior and a conqueror had a moment where he was like, what am I doing, man? This is awful. So a warrior has a breaking point where he says, this death and destruction, like my life's work, is wrong. And he converts, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. But that's going to the location. How did we get from it just being like up here in this little corner to being the whole Indian subcontinent? And mostly you only find it in India and like the west coast of the United States. Here's how it starts. There's this prince named Siddhartha who is sheltered. He's being protected inside the palace. His dad didn't want him to see the world. He was worried he was in danger. And he had a great life, but it wasn't enough. He had all the luxury, he had all the wealth, had all the comforts, but it wasn't enough. So he, like Princess Jasmine from Aladdin, he sneaks out of the palace one night because he wants to see what the world is actually like. So he sneaks out of the palace and he sees some things that kind of blow his mind. He sees an old man. He's never seen anybody old. Old, infirm, wrinkled, shriveled, He sees a sick person begging with the little, the little bowl of the little cup. Somebody poured rags, sickly. And then he sees a funeral procession. He's never seen death before. He sees the people going through the street crying and wailing. And this blows his mind because he's never seen any of those things. And he's like, wait, how can I be so comfortable living over here in this palace with all these nice clothes and great food and servants? I got a wife and a kid. My life was wonderful. And at the exact same time that my life is wonderful, their life sucks. They are suffering. Why are they suffering? How can I be so happy and satisfied and they could be so miserable and suffering? And it affects him to such a point because, remember, origins of religion, we all have that question. Where do we come from? What do we do while we're here? Where do we go when we die? it affected him so much that he left it all behind. He left the palace, left his wealth, left his family, and went looking for the answer. What does it all mean? Well, so he goes to these different holy leaders, these holy men, and they're all saying different things. So he tries some different stuff. He tries one extreme where he's like, I'm going to completely indulge the flesh. We're born, we live, we die, we're only physical beings. Live it up. And he lives in the flesh. And it was miserable. It wasn't the answer. That wasn't where it was. And he realizes that. He's like, okay, so I shouldn't live it up in the flesh. Maybe I should avoid the flesh. If this wasn't the answer, maybe the opposite is the answer. So he completely denies himself any kind of physical pleasure. And in this skinny picture here is because at one point, according to the story, he was fasting so much that he was eating a grain of rice a day. And he was just wasting away. But even that, he didn't get enlightenment, and he wasn't finding the satisfaction, the loss of suffering. And he realized, I'm focusing on all these things. I'm focusing on avoiding suffering, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and neither one is right. So maybe there's a middle way. Maybe there's a better way. So he sits under this Bodhi tree, and he gets this enlightenment, and he realizes the middle way is where the Four Noble Truths come in. This is the Buddhist essence teaching is. Number one, life is full of suffering. Well, duh. Anytime you've ever wanted anything you didn't get, that's suffering. And not just, oh, I don't want to die, or my loved one is dead, or oh, I'm starving, or I'm poor. But no, like, oh, I have an iPhone 10 and I want an iPhone 11, or oh, those new shoes, or that car, or that job, or that spouse, or whatever. All the things that you might want in life that you don't have is contributing to your suffering. Now, you're not crying about it and tearing your clothes because you're miserable, but you're not completely happy. Life is full of suffering, start to finish. We suffer because we desire things. Well, if you want to not suffer, don't desire. Eliminate desire to eliminate suffering. But this is where things, and this is part of why I love it on an intellectual level. Buddhism is so cool because I desire desirelessness. I don't want to want things, which means I want to not want things. Well, how does that work? It's cool. Zen koans I'll talk about in a little bit. It's really cool stuff. And then, well, if I don't want to want things, how do I do that? Well, I follow the Eightfold Path. And so that's what the Buddha started teaching was there's a right way of thinking and doing things and behaving that you can achieve enlightenment. And so it diverges from Hinduism in that aspect, I believe, because Hinduism is more about follow the Dharma, do what you're supposed to do, and if you do, then you'll get some cosmic credit. Buddhism is more about intentionally try to make yourself better so that you can work your way up the ladder. And so some of these beliefs, same as Hinduism, dharma, karma, samsara, similar all the way through. Nirvana is more about not so much becoming one with Brahman, the universal essence in Hinduism, but more about just extinguishing yourself and becoming enlightened and merging with the universe. And if you've done that, if you've gotten enlightenment but you don't quite leave yet, you're called a bodhisattva, someone who stays here to help the rest of us find our way through. And that gets into something which is the different sects, I guess you can call it, like not really branches, but I guess branches. Mahayana Buddhism is enlightenment is available to anybody that seeks it. You're going to get it on your own, but when you do, stay around, help other people figure it out. Like teach what you know, teach what you did. Maybe you can help some other people. Then there's Theravada Buddhism. So Mahayana is it's like the big boat, the greater vehicle, the greater vessel. It's the big, I did it, let me help all you do it. Theravada is more about like, I can't even do it for myself. How can I expect to help someone else have answers that I haven't found for myself? And then when I find the answers, well, I did. I found it. My answers aren't going to be your answers, so go for it. Do your thing. So Theravada is more about the individual pursuit of enlightenment, whereas Mahayana is more about the individual that helps others pursue enlightenment. The texts that are used are sermons and his teachings, and then, interestingly, like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the experiences that the consciousness has after death. Well, how does anybody know what happens with your consciousness after death? And another thing I love about Buddhism is, how do you know I don't know? Maybe I do know. What do you know that I don't know? And what do I know that you don't know? So that's one of those things is, you do you, worry about you. Like, I'm on this path, I'm trying to figure it out. You figure your thing out. So the sacred places, Temples and shrines obviously are going to be where people go to worship. They make offerings, burn incense and things like that, offer up prayers. And here's where Buddhism is a religious faith, but it isn't really. They're not really praying to the Buddha. They're not praying to God to answer prayers or Brahman or Allah or whatever. It's more about trying to connect oneself to things outside of oneself. So it is a religion, but it isn't. It's more like a philosophy. It's like a way of life. And that's one of the other things I think is kind of cool is how do you classify it? Some of the holidays celebrate Buddha's birthday, and the Magha Puja is when it's the story goes it spontaneous happened, a spontaneous gathering between the Buddha and like 1,200 of his followers, like around March. So those are holidays, but also, are we going to celebrate holidays if we're trying to detach ourselves from the world? Yes, you're going to celebrate holidays. Enjoy life. Live it up. So some of the rituals, and this is some really cool stuff. The meditation, most people might classify, if you're praying intently as a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian, it might be called meditating. Meditation for Buddhism is different. It's not the same thing as a prayer, but it kind of is because you are offering up ritualistic phrases. Anyway, so there's meditation that people do, and then there's the mandala, which I think is really cool. Mandala, what these monks are doing here, that's sand, colored sand. They're shaking down into these intricate patterns, and the reason they do this is they spend all this time. It's a very intense, like a meditative process. They make this beautiful, amazing thing, and then when they're done, they're like, "Wow, that's really great," and they blow it all away. Because life is impermanence. Everything comes and goes. So why are you going to attach yourself to something that's impermanent? Kind of like ash to ashes, dust to dust. That whole concept. I'm going to put this YouTube link up there. I'm trying to hurry through, and there's another link here I'm going to share about mandalas. I'm trying to hurry through because I've got a limited amount of time, and I really want to make sure I get to this stuff. So the thing about Buddhism, kind of like Hinduism, is it's an individualized thing, but also because I'm individually responsible for my own enlightenment, well, I'm going to do things differently from somebody else that's looking for their enlightenment. So China has its own flavor, that whole cultural geography thing again. Tibet, Japan. So like you're going to see Chinese Buddhism looks different from Japanese Buddhism, which looks different from Tibetan Buddhism, which looks different from Indian Buddhism. Zen Buddhism is the one that I really enjoy seeing. And I'm going to talk about that more in just a second. I'm going to put this link to Zach Ander's Have a Little Faith. It's really cool. Again, I love Zach Ander. He's got a really great series. He's got a couple of series that I really appreciate. The Zen koans, this is the what is the sound of one hand clapping? You know, like things that make you think that it doesn't make any sense. And that's kind of the point, is think about it. One of my favorites is there's these two monks walking along a path, and they come across this beautiful young woman who it's a muddy, stormy, rainy, wet area, and she can't cross. And so one of the monks goes over, picks her up, carries her across, and sets her down to safety. And this is a problem because monks are supposed to avoid physical temptations, and having a beautiful young woman, well, that could be a physically tempting thing. So they're supposed to avoid women entirely. And so the two monks continue on their walk, and the one who carried her is just like, walking along his way, and the other one is pissed. He's like, I can't believe this guy. This is just stewing. And so the first monk says, man, what's wrong with you? Like, how come? And he says, you carried that woman. You were supposed to avoid women. And this guy says, I left her at the side of the road. Are you still carrying her? So like these Zen koans are things to make you think like, what are you hanging on to? What are you thinking about? Or like there's this man who's running. He's being chased by a tiger, and he's running to get away from the tiger, and it's going to eat him. It's a vicious man-eating tiger. He's going to get eaten, and he runs, and there's a cliff right in front of him. What is he going to do? He's got a cliff here, and he's got a tiger there. What am I supposed to do? And he runs, and he just like tumbles over the edge of the cliff. But as he's falling, he grabs on to a vine that happens to be hanging out of the side of the cliff, and it saves his life. The tiger's there, though, going to eat him. And down here, there's rocks. He's going to die. He's hanging on his vine, but he happens to notice it's not a vine. It's a strawberry plant. And there's this beautiful, plump, luscious strawberry that he picks, and he eats, and it's just so delicious. Tune in next time.